am a black Egyptian. My father is much darker than I am. My mother is lighter than I am. In Egypt, people are identified by the religion first, not the race. So in Egypt, if you are Christian, you are a minority person. But if you're black, you're not a minority person. You are a part of the mainstream society. And I came from this background. And in Egypt, you identify as Arab and as Muslim. And in this country, when I first came, I identified myself as Arab American and Muslim first. And gradually, I became to identify myself as black. I came to the U.S. in 1978, and I became U.S. citizen in 1985. When I became a U.S. resident, I was told by the Immigration and Naturalization that I am white. And I told them that I'm black, and they said, no, in this country, you are white. All Arabs in this country, all Arab immigrants are white. I didn't pay much attention in the beginning to this, because in the Arab world, we identify with our ethnicity first as Arabs, and then with the race second as black or white or whatever. But in this country, you identify with your racial group first and then with your ethnicity second. Gradually, I became black first and Arab second. And I rejected my white classification publicly for the first time in 1987, in February, as a panelist in a function sponsored by the Association of the Study of Black Life and History in Detroit. I said that I belong to two minority groups. I am Arab American and Black American, and I'm racially black and ethnically Egyptian. I was harassed by my employer right after that. I work for a white school district. The superintendent is white. All the associate superintendents are white, even though that we provide services to 30% black population. But the organization is white and the approach is very white. The attitude towards me changed completely after I went out publicly and rejected my white classification. One coworker came to me and told me, a white coworker came to me and told me right after the function that he met with the superintendent, and if I don't keep my mouth shut, my educational career is over. He said, you have nothing to do with these people, you have a history and a culture. These people came from the jungle, you have nothing to do with them. These people lie and steal. When I see one of them in my neighborhood, I call the police. And I was told by the director of general education, who is retired now, in '88, I was told by him that I get people angry when I say that I'm black Egyptian. If I just say that I'm Egyptian, I would get along. I have to add that I was denied promotion twice because I chose black classification. This is part of my 2 lawsuits against my employer, which are currently pending. 2 lawsuits.
Now, just for the education of our viewership, why don't you share with us a breakdown of Egypt as it is today, insofar as blacks or combinations thereof of European descent and what have you?
We don't have Egyptians of European descent in Egypt. We have a population which is basically a mixture of ancient Egyptian blacks who intermarried with Arabs right after the Arab conquest. The ancient Egyptian population was brown and black before the Arab conquest.
Was brown and black.
Then why do you use the word? Why call yourselves black? I mean, you people are more brown than black.
Before the Arab conquest. But before the Arab conquest came the Greeks. It was the ancient Egyptian population was in Egypt for thousands of years. The ancient Egyptian population was brown and black. And the Greeks came in 300 BC. And they started to intermarry with the local population. And then the Romans came and ruled from 70 BC until they were conquered by the Arabs and kicked out by the Arabs in the 7th century. And these people intermarried with the Egyptian Copts. And they made the pigmentation of the Egyptians, the Copts, much lighter because of this intermarriage with Europeans.
Now, you're an educator, okay. Now, how do you deal with situations when you practice your profession insofar as dealing with the mythology or the misconceptions about Egypt being a white civilization?
بقول لك اعمل كده تعال انت زيه لا البتاعه دي جهاز
How do you deal with that?
This is a big problem because Egypt, the ancient Egyptian civilization was a black civilization, and ancient Egyptians were black according to the Greek scholars and the Roman scholars.
So we're going to be reading from the book Hebrews to Negroes, Wake Up Black America by Mr. Ronald Dalton Jr. Okay, chapter 17. The Egyptians, Mithraim, and the Israelites. We know that it wasn't called Egypt in the old days. It was called Kemet. Now therefore fear the Most High, or Yahweh, and serve him in sincerity and in truth, and put away the gods which your fathers served on the other side of the flood before Noah, and in Egypt, and serve ye the Lord. Okay. Many so-called blacks in America have been tricked to believe that we are all descendants of the ancient Egyptians. They believe that we should be worshiping the gods of Egypt, Osiris, Isis, and Horus or Heru. Okay. If that were so, then why was Moses, along with the God of the Israelites, able to defeat the Egyptian Pharaoh and the Egyptian magicians and their gods? If the Egyptians worshiped the creator of the world, then why weren't they victorious in keeping the Hebrew Israelites enslaved forever? This is because the gods of Egypt, like the other civilizations, were a deception by Satan, Lucifer. In the book of Joshua, the Israelites are told to put away the many false pagan gods they served pre-flood and while in Egypt. Ham had a son named Mithraim, who would be called the father of Egypt, or its most ancient name, KMT, or Kemet, which is the ancient Egyptian word for black. The ancient Egyptians called themselves Km, or Kamu, which means black people or black god people. Everyone knows by seeing countless pictures of Egyptian drawings that the ancient Egyptians were a race of brown, black people, like the brother just said in the video. It is also known fact that the other black nations ruled as pharaohs in Egypt, because we know the Hebrews, the Shemitic, Hamitic, they're all intermixed with each other. Okay. The black Libyans ruled over Egypt in the 22nd, 23rd dynasties, the Shinik the first, and Osarkhan the second, and Tuput the second. If I butcher those words, I'm sorry about that. This was in the BC era, over 1,000 years before the Muslim Arabs invaded Egypt or Libya. The Nubians of Ethiopia, Kush, ruled during the 25th dynasty. Their pictures 2,000 to 3,000 years ago show them to black, despite the Egyptian Arabs who we commonly see in North Africa. There is a lot of Egyptians today in America that believe that the ancient Egyptians were white-skinned people. Even Jews today will not openly admit that the ancient Egyptians that lived 4,000 years ago were black. If they did, it would prove that the children of Israel were black in ancient times. So today in America, the media consistently portrays the Egyptians to be a race of white people, as well as many biblical publishing companies. Okay. So right here we have the movie Exodus, Gods and Kings, 2014. The main characters in Egyptians are played by European white actors, while the black actors play slaves or thieves. Sadly, not one black actor plays a main character in the movie, despite clear evidence inside the tomb of King Tut depicting the Egyptians to be people of color with woolly hair. The European film director Riley Scott did receive backlash for whitewashing the story of the Black Egyptians and the Black Hebrew Israelites just before the Exodus. And we know they're not Black Hebrew Israelites, they're Hebrew Israelites or Israelites. We use the term black to, get our audience in, because a lot of people only associate or know with the color black. This, however, didn't get him to replace the white European actors with black actors, which there are plenty of. And they've been doing this all throughout Hollywood or Hollywood. All the, historical films, they usually put, Caucasian or white Europeans as the leading actors and whatnot. Okay. Artistic license. So now we're going to jump down to the bottom of page 192. Greek Cleopatra and her family members were the last rulers of Egypt before the Romans set up colonies in Egypt. She ruled Egypt after Alexander the Great death during the Hellenistic period. And Alexander the Great was a Edomite. Okay. Cleopatra refused to learn the language of the Egyptian, and with her people, she translated the Hebrew Bible into Greek. Before the Persians or Greeks ruled Egypt, the dynasties were ruled by the black native Egyptians, the Libyans, Nubians of Kush, modern day southern Egypt / northern Sudan. Okay. And of course, we have the Zondervan Compact Bible Dictionary. And these are what the scholars say. So right here we have Ham. It says, the youngest son of Noah, born probably about 96 years before the flood, and one of the 8 persons to live through the flood. He became the progenitor of the dark races. It doesn't say white races. Okay, not the Negroes. Why? Because the Negroes are from the Shemitic line. Okay, Hebrews. But the Egyptians, which are dark-skinned black people, the Ethiopians, Amos 9 and 7, okay, aren't thou the same or identical to the Ethiopians, O children of Israel? Libyans and Canaanites, Genesis 10, 6 through 20, okay? Ham, Shem, and Japheth were all men of color, okay? The Egyptians in Egypt today are not the descendants of the ancient Egyptians. The Arabs did not conquer North Africa until after 600 AD. This is why the modern day Egyptians do not speak the ancient Egyptian language. They can't read the hieroglyphics, but they speak Arabic instead. This is also why the mosques in Egypt attract different crowds of people than the pyramids of Giza. In fact, when white people visit Egypt today, the locals immediately recognize them as Kawaga, I'm pronouncing it right, which means foreigners. But when African Americans visit, they are often mistaken for native Egyptians and are referred to as Mazrit, meaning Egyptians. In ancient times, the North African countries were not inhabited by the light-skinned Arabs we see today. Today, the inhabitants of North Africa, including Egypt, are light-skinned Caucasian Arabs that are descendants of the invading Arabic Empire who came from the north and invaded Egypt in the 7th century AD. Egypt was invaded by Rome in 300 BC, way before the Arabs started their conquest of the Middle East, Arabia, and North Africa. By the 8th century AD, the remaining native Egyptians were killed, driven out of their country to the other parts of Africa. Sounds like the Hebrews or the Israelites, right? After the Solomon Temple was destroyed after 70 AD, okay? Or 66, what they call it in Star Wars, right? It's just our story. They're just telling it through the, European or Caucasian, profited off of that and make millions. Anyway, or were forced to co-adapt to living as a minority in their homeland, as we see today in the Americas and so forth. The new face of Egypt would consist of the Persians, Greeks, Romans, Turks, Arabs, Western Europeans, and possibly a small remnant of the native Libyans / Egyptians. So right here we have Herodotus, a Greek historian who lived and spent time in Egypt during 480 BC, made a statement about a group of people called the Cologians, who resembled the Egyptians but lived in and above Turkey, Armenia, among the western slope of the Caucasus Mountains, near the Black Sea, and what is now called the European country, Georgia. Note, remember the Egyptian dynasty predates well past 3000 BC. Okay. As you can see right here, dark skinned and curly hair, which does not count for much by itself because these features are common in others too, but more importantly because the Colossians, Egyptians, and Ethiopians are the only peoples in the world who practice circumcision and who have always done so. Herodotus 484 through 425 BC also quotes, "As for me, I judge the Colossians to be a colony of the Egyptians because like them, they are black with woolly hair." Xenophanes 570 through 475 BC, another Greek historian philosopher who lived during the 500 through 400 BC, quoted this about the Egyptians: "The men of Egypt are mostly brown and black with a skinny, dissecate look." We all know that Moses was mistaken for an Egyptian, okay? He also states black people resided not in the Nile Valley, but in a far land by the fountain of the sun. Aeschylus, 525 through 456 BC, a Greek poet, admits in his literary work, "The supplicants that the Egyptians in his time were black. The crews must be Egyptian, for their black limbs stand out clear to the eye against their white tunics." Okay. The Egyptians are presented as having a dark complexion, as we've seen in the Zondervan Compact Bible Dictionary. The entire Egyptian army is said to be black, both by the Danids and by the Danirs, which from his look out, he distinguished the Egyptians in their first ship, as their black limbs are shown from their white garments. Aristotle, 384 through 323 BC, a Greek scholar and philosopher, quotes this racist statement: "Those who are black are cowards, like the Egyptians and the Ethiopians." Physiology. The Greek writer Lucian, 125 through 80 AD, describes an Egyptian: "The boy is not merely black, he has thick lips and thin legs." Okay, right here. The appearance of the inhabitants is also not very different in India and Ethiopia. The southern Indians are rather more like the Ethiopians, as they are black to look on, and their hair is black, only they are not so snub-nosed or woolly hair as the Ethiopians. The northern Indians are most like the Egyptians physically. The Arian Inica 6-9, okay? And we know in our history that Joseph mistaken for a black Egyptian, and also the Apostle Paul mistaken for a black Egyptian, Acts 21:37 through 39. And as Paul was to be led into the castle, he said unto the chief captain, "May I speak unto thee?" Who said, "Canst thou speak Greek? Are not thou that Egyptian, which before these days madest a uproar, and leddest out into the wilderness 4,000 men that were murderers?" But Paul said, "I am a man which am a Jew of Tarsus, a city in Sicily, a citizen of no mean city." Why would a Greek mistake Paul for an Egyptian? Was Paul wearing an Egyptian crown with jewelry like the Egyptian pharaohs wore? No, Paul was in Europe. And a white Greek man mistakenly thought Paul was an Egyptian because Paul was black in appearance, just as the ancient Egyptians were in those days. Paul was a Benjamite from the tribe of Benjamin. Joseph and Benjamin were brothers in the Bible by their birth mother, Rachel. Joseph married an Egyptian woman while in Egypt and had Ephraim and Manasseh. Okay. So this is where we get the 12 tribes of Israel. And what did he say? Joseph, the main birthright. Manasseh and Ephraim. The house of Israel taken into the Syrian captivity, 2 Kings 18 and 11. Okay, 200,000, 150 of Judah taken into Syria, 2 Kings 18 and 13. Migrated to Europe as the Celts, Goths, Saxons, the Black Irish, the Black Scots, the Danes, the 12 tribes of Israel under the New Testament or covenant. Okay, so when you go back to Genesis, it talks about Ephraim would be a progenitor of many nations. Okay, so that's what that's talking about. I've done a few videos on that. Okay, and as we can see, Ephraim represents the northern kingdom. When you read the New Testament, the Gentiles, which they describe, because there's two types of Gentiles. There are the Gentiles of the northern kingdom who worship Baal or into all the other pagan and heathenistic rituals and so forth. So it says, this meant Ephraim and Manasseh were half black Egyptian. Joshua, who led the Israelites into the land of Canaan, was per the Bible of the tribe of Ephraim, thus confirming that Joshua most likely was black in appearance. Numbers 13 and 8. Of the tribe of Ephraim, Oshé the son of Nun. Numbers 13 and 16. These are the names of the men which Moses sent to spy out the land. And Moses called Oshé the son of Nun Joshua. So the devil's trick is to make the world believe that the ancient Egyptians were a white race similar to the Caucasian Arabs or Caucasian Europeans. And we know that Caucasians are not from Europe. Okay, there's plenty of videos on that. This is why in movies such as Exodus, God and Kings 2014, the Egyptians are white, while the black actors play thieves, slaves, beggars, and servants. Okay? And this is how they view our history. It's a psychological warfare. We don't control our own history. To us, you know, to them, we're slaves, beggars, and servants. Okay? That's how this world is set up. It's in reverse. You know what I'm saying?
Ancient Egypt became white only in the 19th century and in the 20th century. And the scholar who is responsible for this is Seligman, the noted anthropologist from England, Seligman. White supremacy argues that blacks are inferior than white intellectually. They are subhuman and they are incapable of building a civilization. White supremacy had one dilemma until Seligman came. The dilemma was ancient Egypt was black according to the Greek and the Roman scholars. 10 of them said that, including Aristotle and Plato. 10 of them said that in writing. They had this dilemma. Ancient Egyptian was black. So if blacks are inferior intellectually and are incapable of building a civilization, how come the ancient Egyptians built a civilization? Seligman found the solution for this dilemma. He came up with a theory called the Hamite theory. He separated the blacks who built a civilization in Egypt and Ethiopia from the rest of the black race, and he called them brown-skinned whites, or the Hamites. So Seligman saved white supremacy from this dilemma, and all the white scholars followed him from that time on. This was at the end of the 19th century. And since that time, white scholarship says that ancient Egypt is white.
Mustafa Hefni is currently working on his doctorate degree at Wayne State University. His dissertation topic is a content analysis of the treatment of ancient Egypt in world history textbooks. And just how far is this determined Egyptian willing to go to be classified black?
I want to carry my case all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court if necessary.
So right here we have the book, Melanin, the Basic Guide for Knowledge of Self. Table of race types. Type 6, black, blue-black, highest melanin content. African, Egyptian, Nigerians, African-American, Australian Aborigines. Type 5, brown, very black, high melanin content, Native Indian, Mexican, Malaysians, Puerto Rican, other Spanish-speaking people. Type 4, lightly tan, pale yellow to a ruddy red, moderate melanin content. Native Americans, Italian, Greek, Spanish, Chinese, and Japanese. In type 3 and 2, we have white, pale, the lowest melanin content, which is the Caucasians. Now, most of us have seen the movie, The Ten Commandments, but when we look at it from a historical point of view, it's the greatest lie in motion picture history because the depiction of the so-called blacks or Egyptians, they're portrayed as Caucasians. And we know that's not true history, as well as the Hebrews.
The big budget Netflix series on Cleopatra has been hit with claims of cultural vandalism over the casting of black actress Adele James in the lead role. Cleopatra's precise heritage is a point of scholarly debate. There's no evidence that she was black, and the casting has caused major controversy in Egypt, spurring a lawsuit and claims the program makers are erasing Egyptian identity. It's not the first casting controversy we've seen, of course, though the backlash is normally the other way around. Bryan Cranston was lambasted for playing a disabled character in The Upside, as was Jake Gyllenhaal, who starred in The Prince of Persia despite not being Persian or a prince. And of course, Eddie Redmayne, who issued a grovelling apology for playing a trans woman in The Danish Girl. So is casting Cleopatra as a black woman culturally insensitive? Should we care? Isn't the job of an actor, after all, to act? Well, joining me now is legendary Egyptian comedian Bassem Youssef and author of The Case for Cancel Culture, Ernest Owens. Well, welcome to both of you. Okay, let me start with you, Ernest Owens. Off you go.
Yeah, I think that this is ridiculous. I think that she is in full range to play Cleopatra. I think people should remember that there was controversy when the late, great Elizabeth Taylor played Cleopatra, and people thought that it was inaccurate for a white woman like her to play the character. History has said that there is some racial ambiguity around Cleopatra's identity. She's definitely not white. And I think to even assume that Egyptians do not carry some level of African ancestry that can have a darker skin complexion is also historically inaccurate. So I think she's more of the ideal of what Cleopatra would look like more than Elizabeth Taylor would be. And you didn't see as much backlash for Elizabeth Taylor playing Cleopatra compared to that.
That's a fair point. So let me go to you, Bass. I mean, that is a fair point. Liz Taylor was the biggest movie star in the world at the time she played Cleopatra. She was not Egyptian. What's the difference?
Well, first of all, this was Hollywood before it was informed. This is where 1961, when Cleopatra by Elizabeth Taylor, we're not crazy about Elizabeth Taylor playing Cleopatra either. That was also inaccurate. I don't know where do you get the idea that we're happy that she played the role. As a matter of fact, 1961 Cleopatra movie was banned in Egypt and many Arab countries because of Elizabeth Taylor's stance towards the state of Israel, because they supported them. So I don't know where does he kind of get this information. Second of all, this is the same Hollywood that in 1956 they cast John Wayne as Genghis Khan. So this is a time where Hollywood didn't know any better. Now, the problem for me, it's not about color. It's not about white and black. This is a very reductive way to talk about things. This is the way that Americans talk about it. I'm very sorry. Like, I come from Egypt. Egypt has a very diverse color palette. People can look like me, or they can look deeper skin tone like Anwar Sadat, who comes from a Nubian origin. It's not about black and white. It's about the continuous culture appropriation and falsification of history that has been done by what the so-called Afrocentrist movement. The Afrocentric movement started the last century as a way, in a good intention, to teach African American about their rich history of West Africa, the great empire of Benin.
So this is the issue or dilemma I have with these certain news media or entertainment. In his case, he's a comedian. He doesn't seem very funny to me. But I'm white, I'm right. Even though he wouldn't consider himself a quote-unquote white Caucasian, he's a Caucasian Arab, okay? Invaders. They came in and assimilated and took over other people, indigenous people of color. They took over their civilizations, and now they act like they are the progenitors of civilization and so forth, but they're not. They're like Johnny come lately, right?
Ghana, of Songali, the great empire of Mali. But the thing is, that's why you find people like Kevin Hart, who subscribes to these theories, who claim that his ancestors built the pyramids. I'm sorry, your ancestors had their own wonderful civilization in West Africa. They are culture appropriating my culture.
And as we can see, they'd like to box the so-called blacks or African Americans of the captivity. They like to put our history in just one section, the west coast of Africa, Benin, and so forth. But a cultural appropriation, no, that's not the case. Okay? They don't even know their own history. You know, it's funny when you look up and do, research. Even Godfrey Higgins said it best: when you go back into the origin of civilizations or these ancient societies, they all were black complexion. So we have found the black complexion or something relating to it whenever we have approached the origin of nations, meaning progenitors, the alma mater, the goddess Multimama, the founders of the oracles, the men of the first idols were always black. Venus, Jupiter, Apollo, Bacchus, Hercules, Astaroth, Adonis, Horus, Apis, Osiris, and Amun. In short, all the deities were black. They remain as they were first in very ancient times. Godfrey Higgins. Anything ancient denotes the people of color. So what about?
Calling the people of Egypt of today, despite their skin tone, that they call us as invaders, they call us as intruders, and they are being erased from our own history. This is something that Hollywood has done over the years.
I understand, but let me throw this back at you. There's this point that we've had so many cases now where people talk about appropriation with actors, be it their sexuality, be it their gender on occasion, be it whatever it may be. And ultimately, I always come back to one point, which is, shouldn't actors do what their job description is? Act. I mean, shouldn't any actor be able to play any part, actually? And once you start making exceptions for that rule, where do you stop?
Is that question for me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, first of all, this is not a work of fiction. This is a documentary. This is a documentary. There's a huge difference. This is not The Little Mermaid, which is like a fictional character where anybody can play anything. Cleopatra came from a Macedonian Greek origin. And the thing is, it's not about like the skin color. We don't care about if they're black or white. It's about how Hollywood is so culturally sensitive, and they're so sensitive about all kinds of minorities. But when it comes to my people, we seem to be erased. A couple of years ago, they announced that Gal Gadot, an ex-Israeli soldier who condones her government actions and atrocities against Palestinian children, she was going to play Cleopatra. For me, this is even a bigger insult. And Gal Gadot is not black. It's not about black and white. It's about this idea of Hollywood always stealing the culture of my own people. I don't care what Charlton Heston tells you in the Ten Commandments or Steven Spielberg tells you in The Prince of Egypt, but I am sorry, Jewish slaves did not build the Great Pyramid. This has been debunked many times by historians.
Let me
so the thing is, like, we are the only people who are not allowed to tell our own. We are the only people who are not allowed to talk about our own history.
All right, let me bring. All right,
let me.
Okay.
I disagree.
Hang on, Ernest. Let me ask you a question, Ernest. Which is, how would you feel if a white actor was chosen to play Nelson Mandela?
Well, when we look at history, there are a lot of quote unquote white characters that are not portrayed or historically correct. But no one bats an eye about that. Even with the simplicity of the story of Hamashiach or Yashar'el, what they call today Jesus. Okay, they depict him as a white Caucasian man, and nobody bats an eye, but those in the truth and knowledge of history know that he wasn't a so-called white man. But, they control the history and so forth. So, now you're starting to see things shift around, and a lot of people are not going to like that. And they call it Afrocentric or whatnot, but they don't know their own history.
I think that there is historical inaccuracies there. I think that, I think what he's confusing is race and nationality. And I also think that is why you don't see as many black actors upset as Cynthia Erivo, who is British, who played, Harriet, because we understand the nuances of racial identity compared to nationality. versus the identity of the African diaspora. So no one's upset about the fact that David Onyalu played MLK. There may be some people, but others didn't, because we understood the nuance of racial identity. So when we're talking about race and nationality, those are two different things. But I think the issue that I want to push back on what he said earlier is that there are other actors in this film that are playing Egyptians that do not look like Cleopatra or come from there. And I just feel like the energy being focused on Cleopatra is why some people are pushing back, because this actress could easily look, by identity, looks closer to what Cleopatra could look like. But the rest of that cast is fairly white, and you're not saying anything about those individuals. You're only focused on Cleopatra, who's being played by this black actress. But when you look at the other cast, I don't think they're all Egyptian. I don't think they all represent the cast.
All right, let me bring back Bassem. I mean, if this was in a theatre production, I could imagine this happening without people creating much of a fuss. Is it because it's a Hollywood movie and Hollywood's put itself in the vanguard of cultural appropriation?
It's a documentary. Hollywood has been erasing my people from the we are not allowed to tell our own history. And I'm sorry, I have to disagree with the gentleman. It's not about it's not just Cleopatra. Everybody in that movie, her court, everybody who's supposed to be Egyptian, they look like they came from West Africa, the south of the Sahara.
Well, now we're at the haplogroup EM2, also known as E1B1AM2. So that Y chromosome, it travels through the males, right? As in the scriptures. But what does it say? EM2 is primarily distributed with sub-Saharan Africa. So what is he talking about? More specifically, EM2 is the predominant subclade in West Africa, Central Africa, Southern Africa, in the region of the African Great Lakes. It also occurs at moderate frequencies in North Africa and the Middle East. Reading on, EM2 has several subclades, but many of these sub-haplogroups are included in either EL485 or EU175. EM2 is specifically common among indigenous Africans who speak Niger, Congo languages, and was spread to Southern Africa and East Africa through the Bantu expansion. Okay, as we can see, the ancient DNA denotes the people of color. As we can see, Ramesses III is from the E1B1A. So this dude is just talking nonsense, and he's a comedian. So why do we got to take him seriously?
We, as Egyptians, are being called intruders and invaders in our own culture. This has been going on systematically. I don't want to wake up one day and find a museum of the African American culture and history claiming the stolen Egyptian artifacts in the British Museum to be theirs. And now I'm hearing that Zendaya, the very popular actor, who I would love her to play it, but Zendaya ethnically is half Nigerian, half German, and now she's going to play. Where are the Egyptian actors? Where are the Arab actors who suppose it? And I think